And it's a perfect introduction to my sermon today. It's about my great-grandparents, and I learned about them in a graveyard. A couple times a year, my brother Joe and I would join my grandfather on his visits to his parents' headstones in our neighborhood graveyard. From the time we were 8 or so, we would help Grandpa load the car with plastic buckets, the big yellow sponges, and a few bunches of fresh flowers. And we would drive the couple of miles to the cemetery. We'd find just the right spot. We'd fill the buckets with water and march over, splashing the water as we went. Grandpa would pull away the dead flowers from his last visit, and he would pull out the weeds sprouting up nearby. We'd start washing the headstones from the dirt and the dust accumulated over the last few months. And it was while we went through this sort of ritual cleansing, that we learned about his parents, the ancestors that Joe and I never got the chance to meet in this life. Elvira and Anthony DeGioia. My grandpa would quietly and patiently tell us stories of their lives, people who lived in a different time and were from a different land. I learned that a massive boulder was the defining symbol of my great-grandfather's life in a small village just outside of Salerno. It had sat there in a major thoroughfare of this small village his entire life. No one was going to move it. Change was hard to come by in his small hometown. And it was that boulder that he thought about as he sailed to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania at age 15 all by himself. He eventually built his own tailoring business, and he met my great-grandmother, Elvira, and she helped connect him to the Italian immigrant community in the city. They married and had 3 kids. And they spoke a dialect of Italian that probably very few of us would understand now. My grandpa regrets not being more insistent that they teach him their native tongue. Elvira taught my grandmother how to cook. This decidedly not Italian-American woman eventually became a pro at stuffed shells, homemade meatballs, and so many sauces. But the thing that struck me most as an 8-year-old was that my great-grandmother, Elvira, loved to make sanguinaccio dolce, or what you might know as blood pudding. So all the vegans out there, I know, I'm sorry, I have not had it, but just go with me for a second here. I thought this was just about the most terrifying thing you could have on any menu. And in my 8-year-old world of paper cuts and splinters and bruises, blood was far from something I wanted near my pudding. But my grandfather would patiently explain why he loved it. It was more than just pudding, he said. This dish was part of him, part of our tradition, our shared memory. It was a thread that carried through the generations. And it's this month that we consider dwelling and indwelling, or that permanent presence of the spirit of life within our souls and minds. Some talk about it, indwelling, as having that inner activating or guiding force within us. So this morning, I'm asking us to consider the indwelling of the spirits, of the gifts and the memories of those loved ones who've come before us. To consider the great unknowing of what's beyond this life, and what grace can come from feeling connection to those who've passed on. And as we followed Reverend Tara's beautiful metaphor of the tree this month, starting with the roots, moving toward that sturdy trunk and to the heartwood last week, binding us together in growth, we have now reached the canopy. This canopy of our family tree, with branches and leaves shooting off in every direction as reminders of the legacy of which we're all part. And that's both family that we have been born into and family we have chosen in love. What better time to consider this canopy than on the eve of the fall equinox, a time marking the transition of seasons, a reminder of the unfolding of time. And it's that unfolding that is present for Dietrich Bonhoeffer in our reading this week, as he writes beautifully about the pain of losing a loved one, a feeling probably all of us can understand in some way. He writes, "Nothing can console us. We have to simply bear and survive it." He describes the loss we feel as a hole on our heart that remains unfilled. This is important, he writes, because this emptiness, quote, helps us to sustain our old communion, even through pain. Over time, gratefulness transforms the agony of memory into a quiet joy. I love that visual. I can see what he means clearly with my own family story. At the cemetery, my grandpa's stories about food and lost languages weren't just talk for him. He was sharing with us the shape and the curves of the hole on his heart for his parents. And as we washed those headstones, we were sharing in communion with him. In communion with these ancestors, we could now only know through this unfilled hole on my grandfather's heart, a sort of indwelling of the Spirit. Bonhoeffer's message fits well into our UU understanding of interconnectedness as well. Our seventh principle implores us to respect the interdependent web of all existence of which we are part, which we shared together in our promise to the planet. And I think we often turn to this principle when we think about the important and inspiring environmental work that many UU congregations are doing across the country, definitely including this one. But I think we can also go beyond the here and now, the visible, when we think about this principle too. What if we think of that interdependent web as the connective tissue between us and those who've gone before us, between us and those who've already passed into the mystery? And what if we let ourselves ease into this unknowing, this mystery? Our religious tradition calls us to ask questions, to seek truth in community. Under the care of this community, I think we can allow ourselves to consider this unknowing, to feel connected to that which can't be seen with our eyes, or felt with our hand, or heard with our ears. Sometimes the most important thing we can do is dwell in that unknowing. There's a grace in that. This unknowing tells us that we are not alone. And this title of my sermon today, Things Seen and Unseen, comes from the Christian scriptures, and I think it captures these ideas of interconnectedness, of unknowing, and memory, this canopy that we have. In 2 Corinthians, Apostle Paul is writing about his ministry. He's traveling and telling all who will listen about the life and lessons of a man named Jesus of Nazareth. And he's talking about the troubles and the pains he's gone through to do this work. He's dog-tired, but he's hopeful too. So he writes, "Therefore we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. Since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal." What is unseen is eternal. So considering the indwelling in our lives is a good reminder of this. What is unseen is this grand interconnectedness we share among one another in this room, among our families and friends, and among the vast natural world surrounding us, including our beautiful garden just outside these doors. What is unseen are the holes on our heart for those who are no longer with us, but for whom we leave that hole unfilled, so we may create moments of communion with others, sharing stories and memories, and maybe blood pudding, but hopefully without the blood. So let's take a moment today to feel those unfilled holes in our heart, to recall the hidden treasure that is our memories, and to feel this right now. Our connection to one another, in this communion of remembrance, and in the grace of things seen and unseen. May it be so, and amen. Now please join me in